Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of WN Movie Talk Podcast. I am Trev and today I am going to be talking about two films, one from 1953 and one from 1977, both based on the same source material, and they are Wages of Fear, the 1953 French thriller directed by Henri-Georges Clouzot, and The Sorcerer from 1977 from director William Friedkin, and both movies based on the novel by Georges Arnaud, which is Le Salaire de la Peur, which translates to The Wages of Fear. Forgive me if I've pronounced that wrong. I absolutely bombed in French in GCSE. Now, I've had these two films to view and review and discuss for a long while, and I haven't got round to it. It's been on my list to do. And last week I just watched Wages of Fear, and then this week I thought I'd watch Sorcerer. And as I was watching this and doing some research into the sort of behind the scenes, some notes, I actually noticed that there's a new Netflix production on its way of Wages of Fear as well. So hopefully I can get this out before everyone else gets theirs out. It's going to be everywhere, I should imagine, Wages of Fear and The Sorcerer soon. Anyway, I hadn't really heard of Wages of Fear. It's gone down as a classic, a real classic of tension and suspense. First I heard of it was when one of our listeners actually suggested it. It was our listener Jason Paris suggested it when we were talking about films that we enjoy because our parents had suggested them. And the reason it made me stop and sort of look into it was because it was the only time he'd suggested a film that wasn't Flash Gordon. And I looked it up and I thought, oh, that sounds good, and then realised that it was the same film as The Sorcerer, which I hadn't seen, but I had heard about William Friedkin's The Sorcerer. So William Friedkin in the 70s, he made classic films such as The French Connection and then The Exorcist, both of which were really big hits, made him sort of a household name and helped the 70s movie industry become what it was. You know, a lot of gritty new talent moving up. The 70s sort of went away from the glossy, glamorised Hollywood productions and then started making these real gritty, realistic movies. And this one, I remember reading about The Sorcerer many years ago when I read Peter Biskin's Easy Riders Raging Bulls, which is all about the 70s film industry, how the sex, drugs and rock and roll generation saved Hollywood. And The Sorcerer is stated as one of those films that helped to bring down the new wave Hollywood of the 70s, and, you know, along with films like Star Wars and Jaws, which ushered in the era of the blockbuster. It's one of those films that basically they put a lot of money into to get this vision onto the screen. The critics panned it and no one really went to watch it, so it was a massive flop, which sort of made the studios think, right, we're not going to give all these young lads free rein anymore. We're going to rein it in. We're going to control what we give, and it sort of brought the new wave cinema to its end, really. So I mean, the 70s, as I said, you saw filmmakers all making these gritty little personal films, which was starting to resonate with audiences in America and the world over. And The Sorcerer came out the same year, sort of in the shadow of Star Wars, films such as Star Wars, and people were beginning to change and not wanting to see these gritty films as much anymore and wanting a bit more of escapism. So it flits, doesn't it, cinema? It does ebbs and flows, and I think it's sort of in a transitional period at the moment. I think the Hollywood blockbuster and the franchise films have been doing pretty well in the past 10 years, but I think that people are starting to get a little bit weary of them and a little bit sort of, you know, it's not as exciting now. People aren't necessarily going to watch them. Streaming services and things are all changing. So, you know, cinemas goes from being sort of centred around these smaller films like the 70s, and then it goes in, like, we had the 80s where it was blockbusters and science fiction and the era of the sequel, and then the 90s, Tarantino and the independent movies came back again, And so, I think we're well overdue, sort of a return to this kind of cinema. Whether we'll see it or not, who knows? But something's got to change, something's got to give. But anyway, I'm not here to discuss that. I'm here to discuss Wages of Fear and Sorcerer. But before we discuss both of those films, so yeah, because the Wages of Fear and The Sorcerer are both incredibly tense films, I've asked this question over on the WN Movie Talk podcast Facebook page, which is facebook.com/WN Movie Talk podcast. Get over there, join in the chat. I've put, name the films that you find the most tense, white knuckle, edge of your seat viewing experience. We've had several answers come in. Kristen Mitchell has put Manhunter was a classic for me. Heat, also Michael Mann, is another favourite. Yeah, great films. And it is an edge of your seat ride. It's a different type of tension, isn't it, with Manhunter? You're hoping that he can sort of crack the case before it happens, and with Francis Dolarhyde is his name, sort of especially when he's befriending the blind girl as well, and they're great. Silence of the Lamb as well, that scene where she's got the night vision goggles in Buffalo Bill's basement as well, that's another real tense scene. That's brilliant. Yeah, so good choices there, Kristen. Lizzie Blake says Duel, Spielberg's Duel, another truck movie. Sorcerer, Wages of Fear. We've got the truck in these ones, but Duel, yeah, that's a classic, isn't it, from Spielberg. His debut film. It was a made-for-TV film that actually they released over in Europe. They filmed an extra 20 minutes to make it a sort of feature-length motion picture. But yeah, if you've not seen that, it's Dennis Weaver in his car being chased by a truck. Oh yeah, that gets tense. She's also put Jaws, The Shallows, Wicker Man, original. Of course, the original. What a classic film. And then she put Alien as well. Gordon Jackson also suggested Alien, and yeah, Alien is a masterclass in suspense for definite. Simon Viles put not the whole film, but the intro to Inglourious Bastards is so tense, and it is incredibly tense. That's one of the best scenes in any Tarantino film, isn't it? Yeah, that is incredible. But then Tarantino is great at tension. The scene where Brad Pitt strolls through the Manson commune in Once Upon a Time in America as well is really tense, really edge of your seat. Nathan Kent said a recent one, 1917. That whole film is on the edge of your seat as well. That is good viewing. And I think the fact that the camera's always moving and you're on that mission with the kids, even though it's not actually all filmed in one shot, it feels like it, and there's something about that. You really do feel that tension, and you're like you're on that journey with them. There's some scenes in there that are really tense. So some good suggestions there. One I'll throw into the mix as well was one I saw at the cinema just after COVID. You might have heard I'd done a podcast all about it. Was when I'd done a double bill of A Quiet Place 1 and 2. Our cinema was playing them both back to back. That's the first time I've ever done that sort of thing at the cinema, and I really enjoyed it. But yeah, this Quiet Place 1 especially was so tense, and the soundscape in that is really great as well, because it's all silent and then goes loud. Every noise is loud, but especially that scene with the nail. If you haven't seen it already, that's all I'll say. That was definitely a tense one. So yep, some good answers there, everyone. Thank you very much. Talking about the cinema as well, though, our local cinema recently has been playing old classic movies. So recently they've played Jaws. Didn't go and watch it this time because I only went to the cinema to watch Jaws a couple of years ago, and I only bought it on Blu-ray about 3 months ago. I've had it on DVD for years, but I bought the Blu-ray and I just watched it again. So I thought I won't go to the cinema to watch that. The Godfather they played as well at the cinema, and I think this is great. I always think all these films you'd love to see at the cinema. I always think I wish I'd seen it when it first came out. But the one I didn't watch Godfather either, because I've just watched the Godfather films not long ago, I think just before Christmas. But the one that I did go to watch was another Spielberg film, and one that when it came out, everyone loves it, and I was a bit disappointed because the plot, even though there's some great actors in it, great scenes. I won't keep it ambiguous for you. I'll just say Saving Private Ryan. I love a war film, but I just felt that Saving Private Ryan, because of the plot, is so sort of far-fetched. They wouldn't drag people out of the army just to protect one mother. You think how many families were just shattered because of the war? How many sons never came home? How many parents lost all their children? And to make a film like that, the logic didn't make sense to me, and I couldn't get invested for that reason. And then also there was scenes that I just felt had been taken from various other films. A lot of Vietnam films sort of had the same scenes, and I just thought it was a bit, at the time I thought it was a bit disappointing. I was disappointed, and I've never watched it again since it first came out of the cinema. So the cinema was playing Saving Private Ryan this week, and I thought, you know what, I am going to go and watch it again. And although I still agree with that point that it just seems a bit of a far-fetched plot, and even in the film they keep saying, oh, you know, this is ridiculous. It's like they got to, if they say it in the film, then we can understand that it's ridiculous. Do you know what I mean? But having said that, the film, it is an impeccable film. It is brilliant. There are some really great actors in it, some really great scenes. It is harrowing, and yeah, I really thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you, cinema, for playing more old classics. Anyway, that's about it for the cinema. Let's now talk about the two films that you're here to listen to, I suppose, which are Wages of Fear and The Sorcerer. Before I get too far, though, I will say that if you haven't seen either of these films, I am going to spoil them. As I do, you know, they are older films. Please try and track them down. I don't know where you'll find them, but or watch the new Netflix series if that's out, and then you'll know the general gist of the plot anyway. But regardless, I'm spoiling, so tough tit. So Wages of Fear from 1953. Let me tell you the story. Basically, the synopsis of both movies is pretty similar. They cover the same story, but in very different styles, very different eras. But they both do it genuinely very, very well. They're both strong films. Even though Friedkin's film was a flop at the time, it's actually gone on to become sort of a bit of a renowned classic, and it's actually one of Friedkin's favourite movies that he made himself. And it was a very ambitious project, but oh my god, it looks stunning. It is absolutely beautiful to watch. It's harrowing, it's real tense, it's sort of set in the 70s, so you've got a lot of the sort of the tension and that's going on in the world. There's the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is part of it. Organised crime and the mafia and lots of things like that. Anyway, I said I was going to talk about the synopsis, and I've just blabbered on again and haven't. So basically the story is four men who can't afford their airfare to cross a deserted South American village agree to transport a dangerous explosive, nitroglycerine, on a teetering road for higher wages. It's basically a town where people have turned up to this town, but they can't get out. The fare to get there is affordable, but the fare to get away it's out of their reach, basically. And once they get to this place, they are all sort of stuck there, and they're doing menial jobs for pittance, really. And they spend most of their times drinking in bars and what have you. But nearby, there's an American oil company, as they say in the French film, wherever there is oil, there is Americans. There's an explosion in one of the oil wells, and the only way to extinguish the fire is to explode it with nitroglycerine. So the company wants to save a lot of money, and they're willing to pay for this highly dangerous mission some really good money. Obviously, it's the airfare out of the town for these four men. So four guys get selected to do the mission in two trucks. And yeah, a real tense, incredibly tense movie, Wages of Fear, and Sorcerer is no less. Basically, in Wages of Fear, the four main characters are Mario, played by Yves Montand, Luigi, played by Folco Lully. So don't laugh at me, they are actually Mario and Luigi, even though Luigi looks more like Mario that we know to this day. So Mario is he's a Corsican playboy. He's very sort of sarcastic and he just sort of lounges around in the bars, and his girlfriend, there's a girl there, Linda, who is absolutely besotted with him, and he's really horrible to her. You know, she's a beautiful sort of Spanish looking girl, absolutely devoted to him, and he's horrible to her throughout. He's not a very nice character. His closest friend and his roommate is Luigi, as I said, and Luigi is he's a real nice guy. He's fun. He's a bit more portly. Mario, he looks a bit more rugged. He's cool. He's got a cigarette in his mouth. He's the sort of the Roy Schieder character. Roy Schieder plays the lead character in the Sorcerer, and they're both very similar. When I was watching Wages of Fear, the actor did put me in mind of Roy Schieder quite a lot. But yeah, he sort of lives with Luigi, and Luigi's a hard worker. He's a hard worker. He's as a grafter. He works on this building firm, but he's got cement in his lungs. The doctor tells him, you keep up this, and you're not going to live very long. You're going to suffocate, basically. But as the next plane turns up, this aging gangster gets off of the plane. Joe, played by Charles Venel, and him and Mario instantly sort of hit it off. They become inseparable. They become best friends. And Mario sort of deserts Luigi, leaves him standing, and you feel for Luigi. He's a nice chap, he'd do anything for anyone. And Mario sort of takes him, as well as he does Linda, he takes Luigi for a bit of a ride, really. He's a bit of a user, and he's like, I don't need Luigi now, I've got Joe. And they sort of both swanning around, and Joe is very opinionated. He's very set in his ways. There's a scene where they're all in the bar and they're playing the music, and he keeps turning the music off, and then he upsets a lot of people in the town. He's not been there very long, but you can see that he instantly rubs people up the wrong way. So, one of the film's greatest strength actually does lie within its character development. They got distinct personalities and motivations. They've all got reasons for wanting to get out. They've all got reasons for wanting to take this job on. But they're not the only ones. When the job comes up from the oil company, there's a lot of people sort of applying for the job, but only 4 of them get them. And actually, Joe is not one who actually originally gets it. It's a chap called Smurloff who gets the 4th role. But then you get the sense that Joe has threatened him or silenced him in some way, because when they all turn up, Joe's friends with the bloke who runs the oil company. Him and Joe have had some relation in the past, so they're acquainted. And he says, all right, Joe, if someone doesn't show, you can be the 4th man. And Joe is sort of, his heart's set on going with Mario, and then as they're all waiting at like 3 a.m. in the morning to start their new mission, Smurloff doesn't turn up, and who should walk in but Joe? So something's gone on there, he's a bit of a crook. Obviously the film is an older film, so there is moments in it that aren't as polished as a more modern movie would be. It's a very long film. It's 2.5 hours long, and you're literally like 1 hour and a quarter before they even get anywhere near the truck. So there's a lot of setting up this town, and it's a little dusty location. So there is a big setup before we even start going on the mission. By the time they're leaving, Luigi and Joe, they don't like each other. They never have got on. Luigi's a little bit jealous, obviously, because Mario now hangs around with Joe all the time. They really are Mario and Luigi. I'm not making this up. It makes you wonder if they did, when they made Mario Brothers, they were influenced by this film for some reason. Who knows? It's actually stated that Christopher Nolan said he was strongly influenced by this film, and he made Dunkirk. So I suppose that sort of shares the same thing, doesn't it? That isolation, people wanting to escape and getting out of a position where they're vulnerable. But the story, it's intriguing watching them in this town beforehand, getting to know them, getting to see it all. But it's not until they set off on the road that the adventure really starts. And oh my God, it is really tense, because you see the people loading it up, and they're walking up the ramp to put these containers of nitroglycerin into the back of the truck, and one of them sort of almost falls, and everyone just stops. And you see Bimba, you hear a glass smash, and he's just dropped his glass. But that's the thing as well, before they're going on their way, they're all in the office, all having a drink, you know. Have a drink, a stiff whiskey, before you go on this perilous journey. You know, get drunk first before you drive this truck full of nitroglycerin. There's also written all over the truck, it's like, no smoking within 50 metres. And they're all smoking constantly around it and lighting up cigarettes. But then I guess they're all French, so they can't read the English writing. It's a mixed bag of characters here. Bill O'Brien is the bloke who runs the oil company, and he's an American actor. So then you have Yves Montand, who's he's a French actor, as is Charles Vanel, who plays Joe. He's a French actor. Then Luigi Falcoluli. Forgive me if I pronounce all these names wrong. I am an idiot. So he's an Italian actor. And then Bimba, Peter Van Eyck, is a German-American film actor. And they all sort of speak their own languages as well throughout, so sometimes, you know, it breaks into American and sometimes not. There's a lot of subtitles, and reading the subtitles through the film, there's a lot of spelling mistakes and a lot of grammatical errors as well, I did notice in this, but I won't hold that against them. It's still a really good film. So with The Sorcerer, the setup as well is slightly different. Rather than just leaping like Wages of Fear does straight into the location where they're all stuck, there's a bit of an introduction to each of the storylines and each of the main characters, and you see where they're coming from. It is shot in an absolutely impeccable way, very similar to the opening of The Exorcist with the Iraq sequence. William Friedkin, having started his career as a documentary filmmaker, he really observes the ambience and what's going on, and the shots he chooses just to build the atmosphere and the communities of these places is absolutely impeccable. The very opening shot is actually it's sort of like a demonic face. It almost looks like Pazuzu, the sculpture that they find in The Exorcist. And it sort of starts with the word sorcerer appears in front of this demonic face. But the demonic face, like I say, it looks like a demon, it looks like Pazuzu, but it also looks like the grill of a truck. It's very, very strange image. And you wonder why it's sort of there. It does actually turn up again a little later on in the film. Once they're on the journey, you see that it's a sculpture that's embedded into a bank as they are passing. So it still doesn't explain why it's there or what it represents, but it does hark back to The Exorcist, but at the same time it does almost look like a truck. So it's quite a clever piece of art in the film. I'm just googling why the Sorcerer film was called Sorcerer. So it says, Friedkin thought the title fit the film's general theme. The sorcerer is an evil wizard, and in this case the evil wizard is fate. The fact that somebody can walk out of their front door and a hurricane can take them away, an earthquake or something falling through the roof. Would this have been a reason why the film failed? It is a strange title. It doesn't explain anything of the film, does it? And if you went to the cinema and saw a film called Sorcerer, you'd probably think it was about wizards and warlocks and all that sort of thing. You might not be interested in that. If you hadn't seen the trailers and you didn't have any idea, you probably wouldn't want to know. So I'm sure the name hasn't helped. But anyway, the introduction to the film. So first of all, we start in Veracruz in Mexico, and we see an assassin turn up at this apartment and shoot a man dead and then walk out. So this is Nilo, played by Spanish actor Francisco Rabal Valera. He sort of takes on the Joe character as the movie progresses. Then the next scene we cut to Jerusalem, and again it's that hectic soundscape that Friedkin is fantastic at creating. It's a busy, bustling city. There's modern day clothing as well as sort of your more traditional like robes and camels through the streets as well as cars. You see these three young men turn up. They're wearing the Jewish caps, but it turns out that there are Palestinian terrorists, basically, and they've planted a bomb. They get on a bus, and then you see this explosion as the bus drives off. Then they get back, and they're hunted down by the Israeli military, and one of them escapes. And this is Kassem, played by an actor called Amadou. It's unclear for a little while which character he sort of is filling the shoes of, but it turns out he's sort of like the Bimba character from the original source material. But yeah, the cinematography and the filming of this sequence in Jerusalem is really, really well done. It's a lot of handheld camera work, and the cinematography, the colour, the pastel colours of this really fits to that 70s style that I love so much. It looks really great, this sequence. Then it cuts to Paris, and you see this well-to-do couple in a house. She's editing a book. Her husband is sort of dressing for work. He's all smart, and it's a very big house, and you can see there's a lot of wealth there. And he then goes into a meeting, and you find out that he's some sort of banker and he's being done for fraud, and you get the sense that he's married into this money. To this banker, he's played by Bruno Kramer. His name is Victor Manson in the film. He's basically some sort of banker who's embezzling from his father-in-law's company alongside his brother-in-law. He's got 24 hours to make it right before he destroys that family name. And he sort of says to his brother-in-law as well, you've got to convince your dad to come in. And then the brother-in-law basically says, Dad says it's our responsibility. We got us into this mess. We need to face the consequences. Then the brother-in-law kills himself. And then you see the husband, he just flees and runs off. And then we jump to the United States, and Roy Schieder, he's playing a character called Jackie Scanlon, along with 3 other men, is part of this team. And there's a church wedding, a Catholic church wedding, and Italian Americans in there. The bride has a black eye, which is an interesting thing they highlight, but it doesn't really say why. But they're not there for the wedding anyway. Schieder and that are there to rob the money at the back of the wedding, and they rob it, and then one of them shoots a priest, and the priest just so happens to be the brother of the local mob boss. They're warned as they go in, about their connections. And then as they're fleeing in the car with all the money, quite a substantial amount of money in the back of the church there. And as they flee, a dispute takes place in the car. Roy Schieder is the driver. He takes his eye off the wheel for a bit, eye off the road. He crashes. Everyone dies except for him, and then he flees as well. And then you find out he's got the mafia after him, and someone says, look, I owe you a favour. I've got you this ticket out of here. You must flee. So then it shifts to the town where all 4 characters end up, basically. And this is where the story starts. This is the town they can get to hide and escape their past, but they cannot get out once they're there. And it's really run down. In the Wages of Fear, it feels a bit more like sort of a town, whereas in this version, it's in the middle of the jungle. It's dirty. It's impoverished. They're wooden shacks. It's hardly a town. It is just this little ramshackle community. It's a fictional Latin American country, and you can see that El Presidente is running it. Things are very corrupt. It's surrounded by sort of rainforest and mountains, and the only way in and out is by plane. So Roy Schieder is the Mario character. I guess that Bruno Kramer, the Frenchman, is the Luigi character, although they never really have the same relationship as in Wages of Fear, but I'll dwell more on that in a minute. This is Roy Schieder has worked for William Friedkin before. Obviously, he was the partner to Gene Hackman's Popeye Doyle in The French Connection, so they got a past. And there's something great about Roy Schieder anyway. I'm a big fan of Jaws, The French Connection. I watched All That Jazz back along. That is a really great film. That's actually Roy Scheider's favourite film. It's a Bob Fosse musical. Not the sort of thing I'd like, but it was really compelling, really gripping. And the big dance sequence at the end of that, I was like, oh, I'm not really into this sort of thing. And I watched it and I didn't know if I was enjoying it. It's a dream he's having while he's under the knife having heart surgery. I watched that and I came away from the film just thinking about that scene forever. And then I found it on YouTube and I'd end up watching it like 3 or 4 times a day. Just got a bit obsessed with it. But no, definitely Roy Schieder in this film. He's a bit of a hard-nosed. He's tough, resourceful, but again, morally ambiguous in the movie. He's tortured a lot by the past, and you see there's a couple of sequences where he's dwelling on everything that's happened up to this point. But has he got a conscience, or is he just, it's a hard one to define. The Sorcerer definitely delves deeper into the backgrounds of the characters, obviously, having set them all up. And you understand their motivations more. It adds layers to the story, really, and to the film. You've got a better understanding of how they got there and the desperation. But there's something more ambiguous about their characters. You can't quite read them all. They're all sort of more muted, more thoughtful. They're not all open with each other. They're trying to suss each other out as we're trying to suss them out as well. It's not quite as straightforward, the characterisation, as, say, in Wages of Fear, where, you can see who is who in the characters. The character of Bimber, actually, in Wages of Fear, he's the one character who I sort of didn't notice watching him until he's one of the main characters. So he's not as glaringly explained as the others, but he's partnered with Luigi, obviously, because Joe wants to be partnered with Mario, and they're actually the stronger team. When you watch it, they're resourceful. They come up with more ideas, because this perilous road that they have to take these trucks on, there's a bumpy bit of road where they need to keep the speed up so that they don't bump too slowly. If they go over it, it's a smoother ride. If they go over it quicker. And then when they do have to go slow because there's something wrong with the truck, Luigi says, oh, right, we'll leave a sign, we'll leave a signal. And then when they get to this rickety bridge, they got to they got to turn on this half-completed bridge. And it's like the wood is rotting and it's collapsing. Luigi is much more sort of competent and thoughtful and deliberate in his thoughts, and as Bimber's driving it, Luigi's outside propping up the wheels and putting wood underneath and uses all his strength to sort of help propel this lorry off. And I mean, there's sequences here where you see the wheels spinning and everything's sort of slipping around, and to be honest, there's a lot of times where you think, God, that jolt wouldn't that have set it off? And you think they're banging around and crashing and smoking around it, and it sort of almost ruins the tension, because you're thinking they should have blown up with that. They should have blown up with that, but there is still the tension there. There's another bit where they find a rock in the middle of the road, and then Bimber's like, right, we need to drill a hole in the rock and then I'll siphon some of the nitro-glycerine out of one of the containers and we'll put it in the rock and blow the rock up. It's a great idea. And how they get it, it's basically Luigi's got this pole and he's just tapping this rock, and then before the second lorry's even turned up, the hole he's supposed to have drilled in this rock is a bit far-fetched, really, that there's this massive hole in there just from tapping this pole onto the rock. So there's a few bits in it that sort of aren't as realistic or don't make sense, and you sort of just think, yeah, they just sort of rushed that, or I don't know, maybe the book. I haven't read the book, maybe it's more explained in there, but definitely Luigi and Bimber are the stronger pair, which, when you know the result of the film, it's a shame because out of everyone in this film, it's Luigi that you ultimately root for, even though he's a side character and it's Mario that we're following. But Mario and Joe, they start off strong, but then Joe sort of starts to go to pieces. He's a coward, he's old, he's past it, and Mario sort of feels like he's tied to this character. Joe basically becomes a real burden. He's not helpful, and Mario gets really, really cross with him because he's basically carrying him, and he's almost got to slap some sense into him to keep them both moving forward. And the scene with the rock where they blow the hole in the rock, and Joe is sort of resigned to like the fact that he thinks they're going to die, whereas Luigi, they think he has died when the rock explodes, and you see Mario run over to him, and they're almost reunited in this moment. Their friendship is, when Luigi wakes up, Mario is like, oh, you're alive, and they share this big embrace, and quite, they almost snog each other's face off. It's quite a strange scene, but it's also warming because you think, oh, at last they're like, they've made it again, they're friends again, which basically it's all you ever want for poor Luigi. But with Friedkin's version, because the characters have no connection, you don't feel that there's a relationship between any of them, really. They are just sort of people put into a situation, and they've got no choice but to trust in each other to get through it. And I guess that you feel, I don't know, if the relationships in Wages of Fear, if the characters were nicer, like, Mario and Luigi, if they was friends throughout, and they didn't fall out with the arrival of Joe, I guess I'd root for Mario a bit more. But like I say, Luigi is the one who you consider more the better character. So you're upset when him and Bimba sort of meet their fiery end. And it doesn't make sense, Mario's reaction after that. He's really glad when Luigi survives Bimba's attempt at blowing up the rock. But then a little while later, when they do meet their end, Mario and Joe are a little unreactive. They're a bit nonplussed. They don't really react. They sort of just shrug it off. The loss of Luigi. Don't really react, and there's a bit like that. It doesn't really sit right with me watching it now, and it dates the film a little bit. There's moments of great tension throughout it, don't get me wrong, but with the Sorcerer, you don't get to know the characters before. You don't get a relationship between them, so you don't really feel connected in that way, to these characters. They're all horrible characters. They're all, there's a terrorist, there's a murderer, there's an assassin, there's an embezzler. They're all pretty unsavoury characters, very unsympathetic characters, and you can't attach to them like you can the characters from Wages of Fear, but you still feel that tension, but there's no bond. But however, when the embezzler and the terrorist, they go through the same scene that when they meet their fiery end, you feel that Roy Schieder and the Mexican assassin, you feel that they do react a little bit more. They're shocked, yeah, but they're also quite I guess they are traumatised a little bit by it. So a lot of the key scenes from film to film are the same but slightly different, and the town, like the indigenous people to the town, people who actually haven't arrived there, they've just they are the locals, and they're exploited by the oil company. And when there's the explosion and some of them die, and all the town folk are mourning, and they're all sort of up in arms when the dead are brought back. That scene sort of happens in both films. But yeah, other key scenes that are sort of the same throughout, they got the bridge scene, but in the Sorcerer version, they've also got the scene with the rope bridge, and now that is just absolute gold, and to think that all these things are physical effects as well. And they're not really effects, they are stunts, and on location, they're actually driving a truck over a rope bridge as it sways over this river, rocking backwards and forwards. The rain is howling down, the river is a torrent underneath them. It is real tension, and you just think, how do they do that? It's amazing. Whereas the original film, there's more to do with the editing, is how they get it to look effective, than actually pulling back and seeing these tremendous shots and these extraordinary stunts. And then another scene that's similar is where they, in Wages of Fear, they meet the rock, they come across the rock, and in this one they come across a fallen tree, which is, it's a huge tree and it's blocking the path, so they use the same sort of ingenuity to drill a hole into the tree and to plant some nitro-glycerine into it, and then create a hammer to drop on it and explode it, just like they do with the rock. But there's something, to me, it's not just the age of the film and the time, The Sorcerer to me is far more of an achievement. I mean, this was supposed to be Friedkin's. It was going to be a little low budget, 2.5 million budget film that he was going to do in between films, and he'd just done The Exorcist. You know, he was unstoppable. He'd done, as I said, he'd done The Exorcist and The French Connection. He was on a winning streak, and then The Sorcerer. It was just going to be this little film before he'd done a film called The Devil's Triangle, which was going to be about UFOs and the Bermuda Triangle. And then Spielberg started production of Close Encounters, and that sort of made Friedkin think, oh, well, you know what? I don't know if I'll do that, my UFO film now, if that's happening. And then Francis Ford Coppola was out in the Philippines making Apocalypse Now, and there was reports coming back at that, and this is all documented in Easy Riders Raging Bulls, the book by Peter Biskind, which is a bit gossipy in places, to be honest. But then Friedkin thought, well, do you know what, I think I want to go and make my sort of foreign international movie. So he decides that he's going to go and film his own film over in Latin America. And you know, the location he's chosen for this, it is a great location, and it is jungle. They basically, what they're driving through, half of it you wouldn't, you know, it would be hard going to hike through it, let alone drive these trucks through it. So it really is a great location for it. And you know, it brings up the topic, is it a remake or is it an adaptation? And that's something that William Friedkin discusses quite a lot in interviews, and he says it's not a remake of Wages of Fear, it's another adaptation of the book. And he's made enough changes that he has made the film his own, and it is a shame that the film flopped, because there is something, you know, it is a masterpiece. But he said, like, you know, with Hamlet, how many times has Hamlet been made? It's not a remake of Hamlet, it's another adaptation of Hamlet. So I see completely where he's coming from. But if someone was to remake Jaws, would you consider that a remake, or would you consider that another adaptation of Peter Benchley's book? Because you can't improve on Jaws, surely not. And if you went back to Peter Benchley's book and have like the mafia story and that, then you'll lose something. You know, you're not going to make a film that's as appealing as Jaws. So it is a good debate, I suppose, but also Friedkin's argument for this was that he wanted to make a film for the American audiences, because he didn't think enough of the American audiences would have watched Wages of Fear and were aware of it. So that's why he went on to make his own. But, you know, ultimately this movie is about these four men going on this mission that is deemed, it's a fatal mission. You know, Roy Schieder, his character recognises, he says, like, look, you're taking so much nitro-glycerine that you don't need all that to blow out one burst pipe. So obviously you don't think we're all going to make it. So he knows they're on a doomed mission. They all know they're on a doomed mission. But the film both films sort of are about resilience, ingenuity, determination in the face of possible odds and overwhelming fear. You know, finding the strength to endure when it's not just a thankless task, it's a lethal task. It's going to be the end of them. But they find that strength and the courage and the determination to carry on. And I think in this film, in The Sorcerer, they don't really sort of make a comment on it. Whereas in Wages of Fear, there's a scene where Luigi and Bimba are driving, and just after the scene with the rock, where they've blown the rock out of the road, and Luigi says, you know, to Bimba, you know, I'm tough, Mario is strong, but you are something else. You're really, you know, you've got a lot of courage. And Bimba says, well, you know, I was a German Jew. I survived the Holocaust. Nothing scares me. So it does put things into context. Whereas once you've seen those fears, then you're not really afraid of anything else. And I think a lot of people would probably feel the same, having been through like a war and then coming out the other side and surviving. Then certain things aren't going to scare them anymore. I guess they have new sort of limitations of what they deem frightening and impossible. And the human nature to want to survive. Actually, it puts me in mind. I said I watched Saving Private Ryan last week, and it puts me back in mind of that as well, because Tom Hanks's character is very resourceful, and he just, he knows the odds are stacking against them as the movie goes on, but he keeps saying, like, we've got to do this, and this is the way to do it, and he sort of puts his fears aside to just sort of keep on going, and to keep his determination and not to sort of like lose the will. And he's just a teacher, he's just a normal guy thrown into this situation, and that's something that our generation and the generations below us certainly have no real concept of. Everyone's a complainer these days. Everyone is offended by the most menial and unimportant things, that if all hell breaks loose and Mr. Putin and China do start stacking their weight against us, have we got that same resilience and strength that the older generations had? Frightening to think it, but I don't think we stand much of a chance. But going back to like the scenes that are similar and scenes that are different, the scene towards the end of Wages of Fear, they come across this oil. It's like a muddy, oily puddle. There's a leaking pipe and they can't get through it. And Joe has to get in front of the truck and he's clearing debris and leaves and things out of the way as Mario is driving. And he drives over Joe, and Joe's like shouting, but he's not stopping because he can't stop. He's got to keep going through this thing. He can't stall in this puddle. So he just drives over Joe, and then he drags Joe back into the truck to take him on the end. But at the end of the Sorcerer, the Joe character, who is the Mexican assassin, he's injured when they come across rebels in the forest, and that's another scene where it adds real tension as the rebels are there with the machine guns and they get them out of the trucks, and it felt more tense than watching the scene with the pond and the puddle in Wages of Fear. And then how the two films end. Only one man makes it to the end in both films. Mario in the original and Roy Scheider's character in the Sorcerer, and they get there and they get the dynamite to the oil field, and a similar sort of shot. They collapse in front of the flaming oil rig. But then the ending of Wages of Fear, it was almost laughable, because someone phones back to the pub of the town at the beginning and they hear them say, so and so, they're all dead except for one. And then Linda is sat by the phone saying, what about Mario? And then they say, Mario's alive. And she's like, yay. And then the whole pub erupt and they're all dancing. Even though they've lost 3 other people, there's no mourning for that. They're just all happy that Mario's alive. And they just have the whole pub starts dancing. And I mean, Mario's not like a likeable guy around the town as much as, say, Luigi has been as well. Luigi's like a big character. He's jovial. He's generous. Everyone sort of knows him and loves him. But there's no mourning for him at the town. Everyone's just happy that Mario's made it. It just doesn't make sense. And especially the way that they, the enthusiasm they have, and they're dancing and leaping around for someone who's not actually a local as well. I couldn't buy into that ending. And it's a bit of a ridiculous scene. They're all dancing away. And then it cuts to Mario driving back the truck, and he's dancing in the truck, sort of swerving from side to side. And he's ecstatic. But he can drive the truck now without due care and diligence on the road. He's finally got rid of the burden of the dynamite, so he can drive the truck however he wants. And he does. And he's crazily swerving left to right on these roads. But then as he's doing that, it's a scene that sort of goes on a little bit too long as well. But as he's doing that, then he swerves and takes the truck off the road, and he dies, and that's the tragic end. Whereas with the Sorcerer, it's a much better ending, where he makes it back to the town, and the oil man is like giving him the check and telling him, if you get to this airport, someone will meet you there and they'll cash it in. Then before he goes, he says, have I got time? And he gathers up the girl who's working in the pub, who's not, nowhere near as pretty as Linda, but he's like, can I have this dance? And then he starts dancing with her, sort of slow dance, and then the camera pans is outside, and then you see a taxi pull up, and who should get out of the taxi but it's the mafia, and they've tracked Roy Schieder down, and in the end, basically, his past has caught up with him. And Friedkin says, the film to him is more about fate, and the ending of the film sort of sums up that theory that, fate is a funny thing, things do catch up with you, and karma, basically, you can't have an action without consequence. So it's much more of a realistic ending, and it's more of a satisfying ending, even though it's a sad ending. It's a 70s ending, the 70s films were bleak. The endings weren't all about the hero surviving. There is no hero in this film. Again, it's the anti-heroes. Roy Schieder is the anti-hero. He's the one we root for, but he's not really the nicest character. But, the two films, they're both great. They've both got their own merits. I would say, though, if I had to choose one or the other, to me, I prefer The Sorcerer. It comes from my favourite era of films. Friedkin is one of my favourite directors. The lengths he's gone to make this film, it just makes you think why did it fail so harshly when it came out? It flopped big time. The critics hated it. It's become a bit of a classic now. A lot of people consider it a really great film. It scores highly on IMDb and what have you now. But back when it came out, it was considered a misfire. And whether that's just because a lot of the critics knew Wages of Fear and didn't appreciate the remake, similar sort of things happen now with remakes of classic films. Should they keep remaking all these old films? To us, they don't feel old, do they? When they remake like Poltergeist, that's not a really old film, but to the younger generations it is, isn't it? And it's no different than Wages of Fear coming out in the middle of the 50s and The Sorcerer coming out in the middle of the 70s. It's only that 20-year gap. So for a lot of the reviewers, the critics, maybe that's why they didn't like it, or maybe they were just ready to sort of knock the wind out from Friedkin's sails. Who knows? But there you go. That was basically me talking about The Sorcerer and Wages of Fear. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I didn't just confuse matters. I know I ramble on and I sort of leap from one thing to the other. But there you go. I quite enjoyed watching both of those films this week. They were both actually films that I own that I haven't watched yet, but I didn't think I'd feature them as a film that I own that I haven't watched yet segment. I thought I'd just watch them, compare the two. It's not something we've done a lot of, actually, film comparisons. I think the last time we'd done it was my brother Robin and I watched The Lady Killers, the old Ealing comedy, and the Coen Brothers remake. Now, I love the Coen Brothers, but I love the old Ealing comedy as well. So if you're interested in hearing that comparison, just have a scroll back through our podcast. There's an episode on there. If not, just scroll back through the podcast anyway if you're new. Oh, and Nathan and myself, actually, we did do a sort of a back-to-back review of The Departed and Internal Affairs or Infernal Affairs. I cannot remember if it's Internal or Infernal, but the original Hong Kong version of The Departed as well. So we compared those two films together as well. So yeah, have a scroll back through and listen to that too. So that's about all I've got time for this week. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you are interested in getting in contact, then you can write to us at wnmovietalk@gmail.com. Or you can find us on Facebook, as I said, facebook.com/WN Movie Talk Podcast. And also I'm thinking of starting up a bit of a movie quiz, just for a bit of fun. I'd love it if you're interested in films and you think you've got quite a lot of film knowledge, then please email me at wnmovietalk@gmail.com. So if you are interested in that and you do want to register, then please get hold of me. Bear with me while I put it all together. But if you're interested in taking part in a movie quiz, that'd be great to hear from you. I think that might be a bit of fun for future episodes. So anyway, that's it. Thank you all for listening. Don't forget to rate us on any podcast that you listen to. Recommend us. Share us on social media if you can. Or just rate us, comment on us, subscribe to us on whatever podcast platforms you are listening. That will be appreciated. That does help us sort of reach wider audiences. And at the end of the day, that's all I want to do, is talk about films to more people each week. So anyway, thanks ever so much for listening, and I'll see you all again soon. Cheers. The family